I'm Leah Davidson, 29, a pediatric nurse who spent years believing family came first, no matter the cost. 8 months pregnant with my first child, I received a wedding invitation that made my heart sink. My brother's ceremony was scheduled for my exact due date. When I gently explained I couldn't attend, expecting understanding and maybe a small date change, my family's response shattered everything I thought I knew about unconditional love. They called me selfish, dramatic, and accused me of trying to steal my brother's spotlight. But what I discovered about the real reason behind their chosen date and the family secret they'd been hiding for months would change everything. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who see you least. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story is for you. Growing up, I was the child who never caused problems, while my older sister Emma threw tantrums, and my younger brother Jake demanded attention. I quietly did my homework, helped with dishes, and smoothed over family conflicts. The framed photo on my mother's mantle tells the whole story. There's Emma front and center with her perfect smile, Jake grinning beside our parents, and me, slightly blurred in the background, as if the camera forgot I was there. That photo became my blueprint for life. Be helpful, be accommodating, be invisible when necessary. It's probably why I became a pediatric nurse. Caring for others felt as natural as breathing. Every scraped knee I bandaged, every fever I monitored, every anxious parent I comforted reminded me that I had value, even if my own family rarely acknowledged it. Mark saw through that pattern from our first date. "You apologize for ordering dessert," he'd said, laughing gently, like you were inconveniencing the waiter by wanting something sweet. He was right, of course. I'd spent so many years making myself smaller that I'd forgotten I was allowed to take up space. When we found out I was pregnant, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the hormones, or maybe it was the fierce protectiveness that bloomed the moment I saw that positive test. But I finally understood what it meant to love unconditionally. This baby would never have to earn my affection or compete for my attention. They would be celebrated, protected, and seen, truly seen from the moment they drew breath. Jake's engagement announcement came during my second trimester, delivered through our family group chat with typical fanfare. Miranda said yes, followed by a string of champagne emojis and ring photos. I was genuinely happy for him. Jake was 26, had been dating Miranda for 2 years, and seemed ready to settle down. She was sweet, if a bit quiet around our family, and I'd been looking forward to having another woman join our tight-knit but complicated dynamic. The wedding planning began immediately. Mom threw herself into the preparations with an enthusiasm I'd never seen her display for my achievements, not when I graduated nursing school, not when I got my pediatric certification, not even when I bought my first house with Mark. But Jake's wedding was different. Suddenly, every conversation revolved around venues, flowers, and guest lists. I offered to help multiple times. I had experience coordinating hospital events, and I genuinely wanted to contribute. "Oh, honey, we have it handled," Mom would say, waving off my suggestions with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You just focus on growing that baby." At first, I appreciated the consideration. Being 8 months pregnant was exhausting, and the swollen feet and constant backaches made long planning sessions seem daunting. But as weeks passed, I began to notice how naturally the family unit functioned without me. They had group chats. I wasn't included in venue visits I wasn't invited to, and decisions made in conversations that happened when I wasn't around. The exclusion felt familiar, like slipping into an old, uncomfortable sweater. This was the pattern. Jake needed something, and everyone rallied around him while I watched from the sidelines. I told myself it was temporary, that once the wedding was over and the baby arrived, things would balance out. I should have known better. In our family, Jake's needs always came first, and everyone else, especially mine, came a distant second. The cream-colored invitation sitting in my mailbox would soon prove just how distant that second place really was. The engagement announcement itself should have been my first warning sign. Jake had been dating Miranda for 2 years, but their relationship had always seemed casual weekend trips, dinner dates, the occasional family gathering where she'd sit quietly beside him while he dominated conversations. She was lovely, don't misunderstand me, but I'd never sensed the deep connection that usually precipitates marriage. Then suddenly, on a random Tuesday in March, our family group chat exploded with messages. She said yes. Jake had written, followed immediately by photos of Miranda's ring, a modest but pretty solitaire that looked expensive. Mom's response came within minutes. "Oh, honey, I'm crying. Dad and I are so happy for you both." What struck me as odd wasn't the engagement itself, but the speed with which everything began moving. Within days, Mom was scheduling venue tours and calling caterers. Dad, who usually remained hands-off during family events, was suddenly researching photographers and discussing budgets. Even Emma, my older sister, who lived 3 states away and barely managed to call on birthdays, was chiming in with suggestions for bridesmaid dresses. I remember sitting in my kitchen, phone in hand, watching message after message populate the screen. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, dozens of decisions being made, preferences being shared, and plans being finalized. When I finally typed, "Congratulations, Jake. So excited for you both," my message felt hollow, lost in the stream of more enthusiastic responses. The exclusion began subtly. Mom would mention casually that she and Miranda had visited 3 venues that afternoon. "You would have loved the garden at Millbrook Estate," she'd say, "but you know how pregnancy affects your energy levels." When I offered to join the next venue tour, there wasn't one scheduled. Apparently, they'd already found the perfect place. Jake himself seemed different during this period, more confident, almost cocky in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of our teenage years. He'd swagger into family dinners with Miranda on his arm, accepting congratulations and well wishes like a prince receiving tributes. When relatives called to discuss wedding plans, he'd hold court in our parents' living room, pontificating about his vision for the perfect day. I tried to insert myself into the planning process multiple times. I offered to coordinate the bridal shower, to help with invitation addressing, to research florists in my spare time. Each offer was met with polite deflection. "Oh, Miranda's sister is handling the shower," or "We've already found an amazing florist through Mom's friend," or my personal favorite, "You just concentrate on staying healthy, Leah. That's the most important thing right now." The messages in our family group chat began to shift too. Instead of our usual mix of random photos, funny memes, and genuine updates about our lives, every conversation centered on wedding details. Discussions about color palettes, menu tastings, and guest list negotiations dominated every interaction. When I shared ultrasound photos or updates about my pregnancy, they received polite but minimal responses before the conversation inevitably swung back to Jake's big day. Mark noticed the change in my mood before I did. "You seem quiet lately," he said one evening as we sat on our couch, my feet propped on his lap while he rubbed my swollen ankles. "Everything okay with the family?" I couldn't articulate what was bothering me without sounding petty. "How do you explain that your family's excitement for your brother's wedding felt somehow hostile to your pregnancy? That their constant planning conversations made you feel like an outsider in your own family? That you were starting to suspect your absence from planning activities wasn't about protecting your energy, it was about excluding you entirely?" "Just tired," I told him, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was tired, bone-deep, exhausted from carrying a baby and working full-time shifts at the hospital. But I was also tired of feeling invisible. Tired of being treated like a fragile bystander in my own family's life. Little did I know that the cream-colored invitation currently being addressed at a calligraphy station would soon make my exclusion from the wedding planning seem like a minor slight. The date, printed in elegant script, would reveal just how little my family valued my presence and how willing they were to sacrifice my most important moment for Jake's convenience. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon in June, tucked between a utility bill and a catalog I'd never ordered. My name and marks were written in elegant calligraphy across cream-colored envelope stock, the kind of formal invitation that signaled this wasn't going to be a casual backyard affair. I was actually excited to see it, having been excluded from so much of the planning process. Finally, concrete details about Jake's big day. I waited until I was settled in my favorite armchair with a cup of herbal tea before opening it. The invitation itself was beautiful thick cardstock with raised lettering and a delicate floral border. Jacob Michael Davidson and Miranda Claire Hoffman request the pleasure of your company. I read the formal language with a smile, remembering how Jake had always hated his full name, but apparently found it sophisticated enough for wedding invitations. Then I saw the date, Saturday, September 15th. My teacup nearly slipped from my hands. September 15th. I stared at the numbers, certain I misread them. But there they were, printed in the same elegant script as everything else. Saturday, the 15th of September. My due date. My exact due date? I fumbled for my phone, scrolling through my calendar app to double check. There it was, marked with a little baby emoji. Baby Davidson due. September 15th. The date my OB/GYN had calculated and confirmed at every appointment for the past 4 months. The date I'd been anticipating, planning around, and dreaming about since we'd learned I was pregnant. My hand shook as I read the invitation again, hoping I'd somehow made a mistake. But the date remained unchanged, staring back at me like an accusation. Saturday, September 15th, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The exact day I was expected to give birth to my first child. I immediately called Mark, who was finishing his shift at the accounting firm downtown. Honey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, did you know Jake's wedding is on September 15th? There was a pause. September 15th? Isn't that my due date? Yes, that can't be right. Let me see the invitation when I get home. Maybe there's been some kind of mix-up. But even as he said it, we both knew there hadn't been a mix-up. This was the date that had been chosen, discussed, and finalized while I sat on the sidelines of the planning process. The date that would force me to choose between my brother's wedding and the birth of my child. I spent the rest of the afternoon staring at that invitation, turning it over in my hands like it might reveal some hidden message. The venue was Millbrook, estate the one with the beautiful garden that Mom had mentioned I would have loved. The reception would begin at 6, with dancing to follow. There was even a small card indicating that hotel rooms had been blocked at a nearby inn for out-of-town guests. Everything about the invitation screamed careful planning and attention to detail. This wasn't a hastily thrown-together celebration. This was an event that had been months in the making, which made the date choice even more baffling. How could they have spent so much time planning every other aspect of the wedding while completely overlooking the fact that their chosen date coincided with their grandchild's arrival? When Mark came home that evening, I handed him the invitation. Without a word, he read it carefully, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. This has to be an oversight, he said finally. They wouldn't deliberately schedule Jake's wedding for your due date. That would be insane, cruel, completely thoughtless, I suggested. I was going to say uncharacteristic, but those work too. He sat beside me on the couch, pulling me against his side. Have you called them yet? I shook my head. The thought of calling my parents about this felt overwhelming. How do you even begin that conversation? Hi, Mom. I think there might be an issue with Jake's wedding date because I'm supposed to be giving birth that day. It sounded ridiculous even in my head. Maybe we should sleep on it, Mark suggested. Give yourself some time to process this before you call. Maybe there's an Explanation we're not seeing. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Mark slept peacefully beside me, I couldn't imagine what that explanation might be. My due date hadn't been a secret. I'd shared it with the family the day we learned it. I'd mentioned it at family dinners, included it in text messages, and even joked about how the baby would be a September. Virgo like dad. The medical due date card from my OBGYN was pinned to our refrigerator, right next to ultrasound photos and an appointment. Reminders. September 15th wasn't some vague estimate. It was a concrete date that had been part of our family's collective knowledge for months. As I finally drifted off to sleep, a darker thought began to take shape in my mind. What if this wasn't an oversight at all? What if the date had been chosen deliberately, with full knowledge of the conflict it would create? What if my family had looked at the calendar, seen my due date, and decided Jake's wedding was more important than their grandchild's birth? The invitation sat on my nightstand, its elegant script mocking me in the darkness. In less than 12 hours, I would make the phone call that would shatter every illusion I'd ever held about my place in my family's hierarchy. I just didn't know it yet. I called Mom the next morning after Mark left for work, thinking a private conversation would be easier than involving the whole family. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say while I made breakfast, choosing my words carefully to avoid sounding accusatory. This was obviously a mistake, an oversight in the chaos of wedding planning. All I needed to do was point it out, and we'd figure out a solution together. "Hi, Mom," I said when she answered on the third ring. "I got Jake's wedding invitation yesterday. It's beautiful. The calligraphy is gorgeous." "Oh, good." Miranda found the most wonderful stationer. Expensive, but worth every penny for such an important day. Mom's voice bubbled with enthusiasm. "Did you see the venue? Millbrook Estate is absolutely stunning. The garden ceremony is going to be magical." "About that," I said, taking a deep breath, "I noticed the date is September 15th, and that's actually my due date. I'm sure it was just an oversight in all the planning, but I wanted to mention it so we could figure out what?" The warmth in Mom's voice cooled noticeably. "Well, I obviously won't be able to attend if I'm in labor. And even if the baby comes a few days early or late, I'll likely still be in the hospital or recovering at home. First babies can come anytime." In that 2-week window around the due date, there was a long pause. When Mom spoke again, her tone was carefully measured. "Leah, honey, due dates are just estimates. Babies come when they want to come. You could deliver weeks early and be perfectly fine by September 15th. But Mom, the likelihood of that is, besides," she continued, cutting me off, "this is Jake's wedding day. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event that we've been planning for months. Surely you can work with your doctor to make sure you're available." I felt my mouth drop open. Work with my doctor? "Mom, I can't schedule when my baby is born around a wedding. That's not how pregnancy works." "Don't be dramatic, Leah. Women schedule C-sections all the time for convenience. I'm sure your doctor would be understanding if you explain the situation." The word dramatic hit me like a slap. It was Mom's favorite weapon, deployed whenever I expressed any need or concern that inconvenienced the family's plans. When I'd cried about missing my high school graduation party because Jake had a baseball tournament, I was being dramatic. When I'd asked for help with college expenses after Jake's fund mysteriously ran dry, I was being dramatic. When I'd requested that family dinners occasionally happen on weekends when I wasn't working 12-hour shifts, I was being dramatic. "I'm not being dramatic," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm being realistic about the fact that I might be giving birth to your grandchild on Jake's wedding day." "Your first grandchild," I wanted to add, but didn't. "Look," Mom sighed, "I understand you're nervous about the birth and everything, but this date has been set for months. The venue is booked, the caterer is confirmed, the invitations are sent. We can't just change everything because you're worried about a maybe. A maybe. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Mom, this is when your grandchild is expected to be born. This isn't some casual commitment I might skip if something better comes along. Leah, I think you're making this about yourself when it should be about Jake and Miranda. This is their special day, and they deserve to have their family there to support them. And what about my special day? What about the day your grandchild is born? Another pause, longer this time. When Mom spoke again, her voice carried a warning. I think you need to take some time to think about what's really important here. Jake is getting married. This is a celebration of love and family, and it would mean the world to him to have his sister there. But if I'm in labor, then you'll figure it out. Other women have managed to balance family obligations with their pregnancies. I'm sure you can too. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, circling around the same impossible logic. No matter how I explained the medical realities of late pregnancy and childbirth, Mom kept returning to the same themes: Jake's special day, family obligations, and my tendency toward drama. She suggested I talk to my doctor about inducing labor early, scheduling a C-section, or planning better around the wedding date. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking and my heart was racing in a way that couldn't be good for the baby. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. My mother, the woman who had raised me, who had supposedly loved me unconditionally, had just suggested that I medically manipulate my child's birth to accommodate my brother's wedding schedule. The call log on my phone showed 47 minutes. 47 minutes of me trying to explain why I couldn't attend an event scheduled for my due date, and 47 minutes of my mother explaining why that was my problem to solve. I called Mark immediately, needing to hear a sane voice after that surreal conversation. She said, "What?" Mark's voice was sharp with disbelief. "She thinks I should schedule a C-section around the wedding. Like choosing a surgical delivery for my first child is the same as rescheduling a dental appointment. Leah, that's insane. You know that, right? What she's suggesting is medically unnecessary and potentially risky for both you and the baby." "I know," I whispered, finally allowing myself to cry. "But Mark, what if she's right about the other stuff? What if I am being selfish? What if I should be more supportive of Jake's wedding?" "Stop." Mark's voice was firm but gentle. "Listen to me. You are not being selfish for expecting your family to understand that you might be giving birth on Jake's wedding day. You are not being dramatic for pointing out a legitimate scheduling conflict. And you are absolutely not responsible for solving this problem by risking your health or our baby's health." As I wiped my tears and tried to steady my breathing, I realized that phone call had revealed something I'd been afraid to acknowledge. This wasn't an oversight or a miscommunication. My family had looked at the calendar, seen my due date, and decided that Jake's wedding was more important than their grandchild's birth. The question now was what I was going to do about it. 2 days after my conversation with Mom, I received a text message that made my stomach drop. "Family dinner tonight at Romano's, 6 p.m. Important discussion needed." Mom, Romano's was the upscale Italian restaurant downtown that our family only visited for special occasions, graduations, anniversaries, and apparently intervention dinners. Mark offered to come with me, but I declined. This felt like something I needed to face alone, and I had a naive hope that my family would be more reasonable in person than Mom had been on the phone. Maybe seeing my 8-month pregnant belly would remind them that this wasn't about wedding logistics. This was about their grandchild's birth. Arrived at Romano's to find the rest of my family already seated at a round table in the back corner, away from other diners. Mom and Dad sat across from Jake and Miranda, leaving an empty chair that felt less like a place setting and more like a defendant's seat. The formal arrangement and their serious expressions told me everything I needed to know about the evening's agenda. Leah. Jake stood to hug me, but his embrace felt stiff and performative. Thanks for coming. We wanted to talk through this whole situation together as a family. Miranda gave me a small smile but avoided eye contact. She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her engagement ring and glancing nervously between Jake and our parents. I wondered how much of this family meeting had been her idea versus something she'd been pulled into. Dad cleared his throat after we'd ordered drinks water for me, wine for everyone else, which felt symbolic somehow. Leah, your mother told us about your concerns regarding the wedding date. We thought it would be good to discuss this face to face so we can find a solution that works for everyone. I appreciate that, I said carefully. I know this is a difficult situation, but I'm hoping we can figure out something that doesn't put me in an impossible position. Well, Mom said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when explaining obvious things to slow children. We've been thinking about this a lot, and we have some ideas. Jake leaned forward, his expression earnest. First, we want to make it clear that we absolutely want you at the wedding. You're my sister, and it wouldn't be the same without you. There, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they have found a way to adjust the date after all. So we've been researching options. Miranda spoke up for the first time, her voice soft but determined. Did you know that first-time mothers often deliver a week or two past their due date? Your doctor could induce labor at 38 weeks, which would give you almost 2 weeks to recover before the wedding. My hope evaporated. You want me to induce labor early so I can attend your wedding? Not early, Jake corrected. 38 weeks is considered full term. Lots of women have their babies then, but my doctor hasn't recommended induction. My pregnancy is healthy and progressing normally. There's no medical reason to artificially start labor. Dad jumped in, his voice carrying the authority he'd used during my teenage years. Leah, I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Modern medicine gives us options. Why not use them? Because those options come with risks, I said, my voice rising slightly. Induced labor is more painful, can lead to longer labors, and increases the chance of needing a C-section. These aren't casual decisions, they're serious medical interventions. But they're possibilities, Mom insisted. And if early induction doesn't work out, you could always schedule a C-section for a few days before the wedding. That way you'd know exactly when the baby is coming and you could plan accordingly. I stared at her, speechless. My family, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, were sitting in an expensive restaurant casually discussing major abdominal surgery as a scheduling convenience. Do you hear yourselves? I finally managed. You're talking about me having unnecessary surgery so I can attend a party. It's not a party, Jake's voice sharpened. It's my wedding. My once-in-a-lifetime wedding that we've spent months planning and thousands of dollars on. And this is my once-in-a-lifetime first child, I shot back. The grandchild you've been saying you can't wait to meet. Of course, we're excited about the baby, Mom said soothingly. But babies don't know if you're at a wedding or not. Jake will remember if his sister wasn't there for the most important day of his life. The conversation continued for another hour, with my family presenting increasingly elaborate solutions to what they saw as my scheduling problem. They suggested I hire a night nurse so I could attend the wedding even if I'd given birth days earlier. They offered to arrange for a backup babysitter in case I went into labor during the ceremony. Dad even suggested that Mark could stay home with the baby while I attended alone. You're missing the point, I said when they paused for breath. This isn't about childcare arrangements or recovery timelines. This is about the fact that you scheduled Jake's wedding for my due date without considering how that might affect me. We considered it, Jake said quietly, but this was the only date the venue had available that worked with our budget. And honestly, Leah, we figured you'd want to be there for us. We figured you'd find a way to make it work. The way you always Do, Mom added with a smile that probably looked supportive to anyone watching but felt like a blade to me. You're so good at putting family first, sweetheart. That's what makes you special. As I sat there, surrounded by my family in that dimly lit restaurant, I realized I was seeing them clearly for the first time in my adult life. This wasn't a discussion or a negotiation. It was an intervention designed to pressure me into compliance. They had planned this dinner, coordinated their arguments, and presented a united front against my completely reasonable position that I might not be able to attend an event scheduled for my due date. The restaurant receipt, which I glimpsed when Dad paid the check, showed a total of $247.68 for our family dinner. They had spent almost $250 on an elaborate guilt trip, complete with wine pairings and dessert, to convince me that my child's birth was less important than Jake's wedding dot as we walked to our cars in the parking lot. Mom linked her arm through mine. Think about what we discussed tonight, okay, honey? I know you'll make the right decision. You always do. But as I drove home to Mark, I realized that for the first time in my life, the right decision, according to my family, might be very different from the right decision for me and my child. The question was whether I finally had the courage to choose myself over their expectations. Driving home from Romano's, my mind drifted back to Jake's college graduation, a memory I'd buried so deep I was surprised it surfaced now. I'd been scheduled to work a double shift at the hospital that weekend, covering for a colleague whose child was sick. When I'd asked my supervisor if I could find coverage to attend my brother's graduation, she'd been understanding but firm. The pediatric ward was short-staffed, and my patients needed me. I'd called Mom to explain, expecting disappointment, but understanding. Instead, I got 20 minutes of tears and accusations. This is your brother's big day, Leah. He's the first person in our family to graduate college. How can you choose work over family? The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake was graduating because our parents had spent their entire college fund on his education. When my turn came, the money had mysteriously evaporated, eaten up by unexpected expenses and investment losses. I'd worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for nursing school, studying between shifts and taking out loans that I'd only recently finished paying off, but Jake's graduation was different. Dad took time off work, Mom bought a new dress, and Emma flew in from Colorado. They had a celebration dinner afterward at the country club, posted dozens of photos on social media, and framed Jake's diploma alongside a family portrait that, once again, I wasn't in. When I'd finally seen the photos weeks later, Mom's caption read, "So proud of our college graduate." Our whole family came together to celebrate this amazing achievement. The fact that their whole family was missing, one member seemed to escape everyone's notice. That pattern had defined my entire childhood. Jake's baseball games took precedence over my school concerts. His friends were welcome at family gatherings, while mine were often forgotten or told there wasn't enough room. When he crashed Dad's car junior year, it was an accident that could happen to anyone. When I accidentally broke Mom's favorite vase-moving boxes to help them redecorate, it was evidence of my carelessness and lack of consideration. The college fund situation was perhaps the most blatant example of the family's priorities. But it wasn't the only one. Jake's senior trip to Europe was funded by a special opportunity fund that didn't exist when I expressed interest in a nursing program abroad. His post-graduation apartment deposit came from the Family Emergency Fund, while my request for help with my wedding expenses was met with lectures about financial responsibility and living within my means. Mark had noticed the dynamic early. In our relationship, they talk about you like you're the family's built-in support system, he'd observed after a particularly frustrating holiday dinner. Like you exist to make everyone else's life easier. He wasn't wrong. I was the one who remembered birthdays, organized family gatherings, and smoothed over conflicts when Jake's selfishness caused friction. When Dad had his heart attack 2 years ago, I was the one who took time off work to coordinate his care, drive him to appointments, and research the best cardiac specialists. Jake had sent flowers and visited twice visits that somehow became family legend as examples of his devotion and care. Jake dropped everything to be here for Dad, Mom had told relatives, apparently forgetting that I'd dropped everything for 3 weeks while Jake dropped by for 3 hours. The wedding planning had followed the same script, but with an intensity I'd never experienced before. Every family conversation revolved around Jake's needs, Jake's vision, and Jake's special day. When I'd offered to help with planning, I was told they had it handled. When I'd suggested budget-friendly alternatives based on my own wedding experience, I was told they weren't looking to cut corners on such an important event. The engagement photos, wedding shower, and bachelor party were all coordinated and celebrated with a level of enthusiasm that made my own wedding feel like an afterthought. Not that anyone explicitly said my wedding hadn't been important, but the evidence was in the details. Jake's engagement announcement got a family dinner and champagne toast. Mine had been acknowledged with a group text saying, "Congratulations," and 3 heart emojis. Jake's wedding shower was a catered affair at Mom's country club, complete with professional decorations and a guest list of 40 people. My shower had been a potluck in my aunt's living room with mismatched chairs and homemade cookies. Both events were lovely in their own way, but the disparity in effort and investment was impossible to ignore. What hurt most wasn't the favoritism itself. I'd made peace with my position as the family's secondary child years ago. What hurt was the casual cruelty of scheduling Jake's wedding for my due date, as if my child's birth was just another minor inconvenience to work around. Sitting in my driveway, hands resting on my swollen belly, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't about wedding logistics or scheduling conflicts. This was about my family's fundamental inability to see me as anything more than a supporting character in their story. Jake was the golden child, brilliant, charming, and deserving of every sacrifice the family could make. Emma was the independent success story, building her own life far from family drama. And I was the caretaker, the problem solver, the one who could always be counted on to put everyone else's needs before my own. The baby kicked hard against my ribs as if sensing my distress. I placed both hands on my belly, feeling the solid weight of this tiny person who would soon depend on me for everything. "I'm going to do better for you," I whispered. "You're going to grow up knowing you matter. You're going to know that your needs are important, your feelings are valid, and your special moments are worth celebrating." As I walked into my house, I realized I was making more than a promise to my unborn child. I was making a promise to myself. For the first time in my life, I was going to choose my own needs over my family's expectations. The question was whether they would ever forgive me for it. Mark was waiting for me when I got home from Romano's, sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop open and a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know about how the family dinner had gone. "That bad?" he asked, closing the laptop and pulling me into his arms. I buried my face against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the faint smell of coffee. "Worse, they want me to schedule a C-section around the wedding date." "They want you to what?" Mark's voice was sharp with disbelief. He pulled back to look at me, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Please tell me you're exaggerating." "I wish I was." "They've got it all figured out induce at 38 weeks, or schedule surgery for a few days before the wedding so I can attend." They talked about it like choosing a restaurant for dinner. Mark's jaw tightened in a way I'd rarely seen. My husband was generally mild-mannered, the type to avoid confrontation and give people the benefit of the doubt. But when it came to protecting me or our future child, he had a steel core that surprised people. "Leah, they're talking about unnecessary." Medical intervention for a social event. Do they understand that C-sections are major surgery? That inductions can lead to complications? Apparently not. Or they don't care. I sank into the chair beside him, suddenly exhausted. Mark, I keep trying to figure out if I'm being unreasonable. Maybe I should be more flexible. Maybe there's some compromise I'm not seeing. Stop. Mark's voice was firm but gentle. You're not being unreasonable, and there's no compromise that involves risking your health or our baby's health for a wedding. He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he opened his laptop again, clicking through what looked like his work calendar. I need to show you something, he said, turning the screen toward me. I requested time off for September 15th back in March. The day after your first appointment, when we confirmed the due date, I blocked off 2 weeks, the week before and the week after, because I wanted to be completely available when our baby arrived. I stared at the calendar entry, paternity leave, baby Davidson due, marked in bold across 2 weeks in September. The request had been submitted on March 17th, approved on March 20th. You've had this scheduled for 4 months? Of course I have. This is the most important thing that's ever happened to us. I've been planning around this date since the moment we knew it. He scrolled down to show me additional entries, prenatal appointments he'd blocked time for, backup coverage he'd arranged with colleagues, even a note about having our hospital bags packed by September 1st. Mark, this makes it even worse. If you could plan around my due date 4 months in advance, why couldn't my family consider it when choosing Jake's wedding date? Because they didn't want to, Mark said simply. Leah, I've been watching your family dynamics for 3 years now, and I've kept my mouth shut because I know how much they mean to you. But this is beyond the usual favoritism. This is cruel. I felt tears starting again, the pregnancy hormones making every emotion feel amplified. What if they're right, though? What if I'm being selfish? What if good family members just find ways to make things work? Mark closed the laptop and took my hands in his. Let me ask you something. If the situation were reversed, if you were getting married and Emma was due the same day, what would you do? I'd change the date, I said immediately. Of course I'd change the date. I'd never ask my sister to miss her child's birth for my wedding. And if changing the date meant losing your venue or paying a penalty, I'd find another venue. I'd pay the penalty. Mark, I'd get married in our backyard before I'd ask Emma to schedule surgery around my wedding. That's the difference between you and them, Mark said quietly. You put family relationships before event planning. They put event planning before family relationships. He pulled up another screen on his laptop, a document I recognized as our family emergency plan. We'd created it early in my pregnancy, listing hospital contacts, insurance information, and backup childcare arrangements. Every detail had been carefully considered and planned. Look at this, Mark said, pointing to a section titled Labor and Delivery. We've spent months preparing for this moment. We've taken childbirth classes, toured the hospital, interviewed pediatricians, and researched every possible scenario. This isn't some casual event we can reschedule around other people's social calendars. I know that, I said. But they keep making me feel like I'm being difficult, like I should be more accommodating. Leah, accommodating would be if they'd asked you to help with wedding planning and you said you were too tired because of the pregnancy. Accommodating would be if they'd invited you to the bachelor party and you declined because you couldn't drink. What they're asking isn't accommodation, it's subordination. They want you to subordinate your child's birth to Jake's wedding. The word hit me like a physical blow. Subordination. That's exactly what this was, a demand that I rank my family's priorities above my own, even when those priorities involved my child's safety and my own health. I've been making excuses for them my whole life, I said slowly, telling myself they don't mean to exclude me. They're just busy with their own lives. convincing myself that their favoritism toward Jake is just personality differences, not actual preference. And maybe some of that was true before, Mark said, but this is different. This is your child, their grandchild. And they're treating the birth like an inconvenience to work around. I looked at my husband's carefully planned calendar, at the love and consideration he'd put into preparing for our baby's arrival, and then thought about my family's casual suggestions that I undergo surgery to accommodate their party planning. What do? I asked. You protect your family, Mark said, placing a hand on my belly. This little person is your priority now. Not Jake's wedding, not your parents' expectations, not anyone else's convenience. Your child comes first. For the first time since receiving that cream-colored invitation, I felt a sense of clarity. My husband had spent months preparing to welcome our child with love, excitement, and careful planning. My birth family had spent months planning a wedding around my due date and then trying to convince me that my child's arrival was the problem to be solved. The choice, what I finally saw it clearly, was obvious. Something about the family dinner at Romano's nagged at me for days afterward. It wasn't just their unified pressure campaign or their casual dismissal of my concerns. It was the rehearsed quality of their arguments. They'd all known exactly what to say, had coordinated their talking points, and had presented solutions that seemed too detailed to have been brainstormed on the spot. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the September 15th date hadn't been chosen. Accidentally, my family had looked at that calendar, seen my due date clearly marked, and decided to proceed anyway. But why? What made that specific date so important that they were willing to exclude me from Jake's wedding? I started investigating like the pediatric nurse I was, methodically, thoroughly, and with attention to details that others might miss. First, I called the venue directly, claiming to be interested in booking an event. Millbrook Estate is absolutely gorgeous, the coordinator gushed when I explained I was looking for a wedding venue. We're booking about 18 months out, right? Now for our preferred dates, but I might have some availability for off-season or weekday events. What about September dates? I asked. Specifically mid-September. September is peak season, so we're very limited. Most of our September Saturdays for this year have been booked for over a year. She paused, and I could hear computer keys clicking. Actually, let me check something. Yes, we did have one September. Saturday become available recently due to a cancellation, but that's already been rebooked. September 15th? I asked, my heart racing. I can't discuss specific client information, she said apologetically. But I can tell you that date was originally booked by another couple who had to cancel due to family circumstances. The new clients were very fortunate. We rarely have. Saturday availability in September, and this date came with a significant discount due to the short notice. A significant discount. My family had gotten Jake's dream venue at a reduced rate because another couple's family circumstances had forced them to cancel. I thanked the coordinator and hung up, my mind racing. Next, I called my cousin Sarah, who had always been the family gossip and usually knew more about everyone's business than they knew themselves. Sarah was Emma's age, lived about an hour away, and maintained relationships with extended family members who often shared information they probably shouldn't. Sarah, can I ask you something about Jake's wedding? I said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Oh, honey, isn't it exciting? Although I have to say, the timing seems a little crazy with your due date and all. Are you nervous about potentially missing it? That's actually what I wanted to ask about. Do you know how they chose September 15th? It seems like such a random date. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Well, I probably shouldn't say anything, but Mom mentioned something at Easter about Uncle Dave helping with wedding costs. Apparently, Miranda's family isn't in a position to contribute much, so your parents are covering most of the expenses. Uncle Dave was my father's brother and the family's financial advisor. If he was involved in wedding funding, he'd definitely have opinions about budgets and cost savings. Did Mom say anything else about the planning? I pressed. Just that they were really fortunate to get such a beautiful venue at a reduced rate. Something about another couple canceling and Jake and Miranda being able to swoop in and save thousands of dollars. Sarah paused. Why? Is everything okay? I deflected with small talk and promised to call her again soon, but my suspicions were crystallizing. Jake's wedding date hadn't been chosen for sentimental reasons or availability. Preferences, it had been chosen because it was cheap. That evening, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I went through my parents' financial information that they'd left visible during family gatherings. I'd always been careful to respect their privacy, but if they were making decisions that affected my child's birth based on money, I needed to understand the full picture during our next family dinner, a casual Sunday meal where the wedding planning dominated. Conversation as usual, I offered to help clean up in the kitchen. While Mom loaded the dishwasher and Dad watched television in the living room, I noticed a stack of papers on the kitchen counter that included what appeared to be wedding-related receipts and invoices. I didn't snoop deliberately, but when Miranda's mother's name caught my eye on a bank statement that was sitting on top of the pile, I couldn't help but notice the pattern of declined transactions and insufficient fund fees. The Hoffman family's financial situation was apparently worse than not in a position to contribute much. They were actively struggling to pay basic bills. A handwritten note in Mom's familiar script was paper-clipped to the bank statement. M's family situation worse than expected. We'll need to cover full amount. September 15th discount saves us $8,000. Keep this date no matter what. No matter what. Not no matter what happens with vendor availability, or no matter what the weather forecast says. No matter what, including a conflict with their grandchild's. BIRTH, I photographed the note with my phone, my hands shaking slightly. Here was the proof I'd been looking for, written in my mother's own handwriting. They had known about the conflict with my due date, and they had explicitly decided that saving money was more important than accommodating my pregnancy. Finding everything okay in there? Mom called from the dining room. Just getting some water, I replied, quickly moving away from the counter dot as I drove home that evening. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Miranda's family was financially struggling, probably had been for months. My parents had stepped in to cover wedding costs, which explained their increased involvement in planning and their resistance to any changes that might affect their careful budgeting. When the September 15th date became available at a significant discount, they'd grabbed it immediately, despite knowing it was my due date. The $8,000 savings was apparently worth more to them than their daughter's presence at the wedding or their grandchild's birth. The investigation had given me facts, but it had also given me something more valuable: clarity. This wasn't about oversight, miscommunication, or family loyalty. This was about money, and I had just learned exactly how much my family valued my presence. $8,000 less than I thought. 2 days after discovering Mom's note, I called Sarah again. This time, I wasn't fishing for information. I was ready to share what I'd learned and see if she could fill in the gaps. Sarah, I need to talk to you about something serious. Can we meet for coffee? Of course, honey. Is everything okay? You sound upset. We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between our houses, the kind of place where you could have private conversations without being overheard by family, friends, or neighbors. I arrived first, choosing a corner table where we could talk freely, and ordered a decaf latte while I waited. Sarah arrived 10 minutes later, looking concerned. She was 3 years older than me, had always been more like a sister than a cousin, and had inherited our grandmother's gift for knowing everyone's business before they knew it themselves. Leah, you look exhausted, she said, settling into the chair across from me. What's going on? I showed her the photo of Mom's note on my phone. Sarah's eyes widened as she read it, and she looked up at me with an expression of shock and recognition. "Oh, honey," she said quietly. "You found out?" "You knew." I felt a surge of betrayal, followed immediately by a relief that someone else understood what I was dealing with. I suspected something was off, but I didn't know the details until last week. Sarah glanced around the cafe to make sure we weren't being overheard, then leaned forward. "My mom told me some things that I probably wasn't supposed to hear." Aunt Linda was Sarah's mother and Mom's younger sister. The two of them talked almost daily and shared information with the casual disregard for privacy that came from 40 years of sisterhood. "What did Aunt Linda tell you?" "That your parents are in way over their heads financially with this wedding. Miranda's family lost their house last winter. They're living with Miranda's grandmother right now. They can't contribute anything to wedding costs, not even Miranda's dress." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "How much are my parents spending?" "According to Mom, close to $40,000. The venue, catering, flowers, photographer, Miranda's dress, the honeymoon, everything. Your dad took out a second mortgage to cover it." "A second mortgage?" "My parents had leveraged their house to pay for Jake's wedding. No wonder they've been so desperate to save money wherever they could. Sarah, they could have had a beautiful wedding for half that amount. They could have chosen a different venue, a different date, a smaller guest list, but not the wedding Jake wanted," Sarah said gently. "And definitely not the wedding your parents wanted to give him." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Leah, there's more. Mom heard your parents talking about the due date conflict weeks ago. Your mother was worried about it, but your father said they couldn't afford to lose the venue deposit and find something else." "Dad said that?" "He said Jake deserved to have his perfect day and that babies come when they come. So there was no point in changing plans based on a maybe." Sarah's voice was soft with sympathy. "Mom tried to suggest that they could find a compromise, but your parents had already made up their minds." I sat back in my chair, processing this information. My parents hadn't just chosen money over my presence. They discussed it, debated it, and deliberately decided that Jake's perfect wedding was worth more than their grandchild's birth. "There's something else," Sarah said hesitantly. "Mom said your parents are planning to ask you to contribute to wedding costs. They think that since you're not paying for a wedding gift or travel expenses because you won't be attending, you should help cover some of the financial burden." I stared at her. "They want me to pay for the wedding I can't attend because it's scheduled for my due date? I know it sounds insane, but they're apparently struggling more than they've let on, and they're looking for ways to reduce the financial pressure." The coffee shop receipt from our meeting would later become a symbol for me, evidence of the moment when I learned just how calculated my family's betrayal had been. 2 lattes, 1 blueberry muffin, $12.47 total. Such a small amount compared to the $40,000 my parents were spending on Jake's wedding, or the $8,000 they'd saved by choosing my due date. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Do you think I'm being unreasonable? Should I be trying harder to accommodate their plans?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "Leah, if this were reversed, if you were getting married and Jake's wife was due the same day, what do you think your family would do?" "They'd expect Jake to miss my wedding," I said without hesitation. "They'd say his wife and baby came first." And they'd be right, exactly. But because it's you, because you're the one who always accommodates everyone else's needs, they expect you to find a way to make it work. Sarah leaned forward again. "Honey, I love our family, but they've been taking advantage of your good nature for years. This is just the most extreme example. What should I do?" "Whatever you need to do to protect yourself and your baby. Even if that means disappointing them. Even if that means they're angry with you." Sarah's voice was firm. "Leah, you're about to become a mother. Your job now is to model healthy boundaries for your child. Do you want your daughter growing up thinking she should sacrifice her own important moments for other people's convenience? As we hugged goodbye in the parking lot, Sarah whispered, "For what it's worth, I think what they're doing is wrong. And if you decide not to attend the wedding, I'll support you completely." Driving home, I realized that Sarah's support meant more to me than my immediate family's approval. She had listened to the facts, considered my position, and validated my feelings without trying to manipulate me into compliance. The conversation had given me the final piece of information I needed to make my decision. My parents hadn't just overlooked my due date, they gambled their house on Jake's wedding and decided that protecting their investment was more important than protecting their relationship with me. The question now wasn't whether I should attend the wedding. The question was whether I had the courage to set boundaries with people who clearly had no intention of respecting them. The call came on a Tuesday evening while Mark and I were assembling the crib in what would soon be our nursery. I was sitting on the floor, sorting tiny screws and hardware pieces while Mark wrestled with the instruction manual when my phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen. "Leah, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Your mother and I have been discussing this wedding situation, and we think it's time to make some concrete plans." I put the phone on speaker so Mark could hear, a decision that would prove wise given what followed. "What kind of plans, Dad?" "Well, we've been researching this whole due date thing, and it turns out you have more options than we initially thought. Dr. Patterson, you remember him. He delivered you and your siblings. He says that scheduling deliveries around important family events is more common than people think." Dr. Patterson had been the family physician when I was a child, but he'd retired years ago. The fact that my parents had contacted him without consulting my current OB-GYN was both presumptuous and irrelevant. "Dad, Dr. Patterson isn't my doctor. I have an excellent OB-GYN who's been managing my pregnancy, and she hasn't recommended any intervention." "But she would." "If you explain the circumstances," Dr. Patterson said most doctors are very understanding about family obligations. Mark looked up from the crib assembly, his expression darkening. I could see him struggling to stay quiet and let me handle the conversation. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Dad?" "We want you to schedule a C-section for September 10th. That gives you 5 days to recover before the wedding, and it ensures that you'll be available for Jake's big day." The screws I'd been holding scattered across the floor as my hands started shaking. "You want me to have major abdominal surgery so I can attend the party 5 days later?" "It's not a party, Leah. It's your brother's wedding. And C-sections are routine procedures. Women have them every day." Mark stood up, no longer able to contain himself. "Mr. Davidson, with all due respect, C-sections are major surgery with serious recovery times. Leah wouldn't be able to drive, lift anything over 10 pounds, or be on her feet for extended periods. Attending a wedding 5 days post-surgery would be medically inadvisable and potentially dangerous." "Mark, I appreciate your concern." Dad's voice took on the patronizing tone he used when he thought someone was being overly dramatic, but modern. "Medicine has made these procedures much safer and easier than they used to be. Leah is young and healthy," she bounced back quickly. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not having unnecessary surgery to accommodate a wedding schedule. That's not a reasonable request." "Leah, I'm going to be very direct with you because I think you need to understand what's at stake here." Dad's voice hardened. "We have invested a significant amount of money in this wedding. We've made commitments to vendors, booked venues, and promised Jake and Miranda the wedding of their dreams. We cannot afford to have family drama or last-minute changes." "Family drama?" I repeated. "Dad, I might be giving birth to your grandchild that day. That's not drama, that's life. And if you're in labor that day, then you're in labor. But if You're not if the baby comes early or late. We expect you to be at that wedding, which is why we think it makes sense to control the timing and schedule the delivery for a convenient date. Mark grabbed the phone from my hand. Mr. Davidson, what you're describing isn't medical care. It's event planning. You're asking Leah to undergo surgery for your convenience, not for her health or the baby's health. Mark, this is a family matter. This is my wife and my child, Mark said firmly. And as Leah's husband, I'm telling you that we will not be scheduling unnecessary medical procedures around social events. Dad was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a threat. I think you both need to consider the long-term consequences of this decision. Family relationships are more important than temporary inconveniences. Are you threatening us? Mark asked. I'm reminding you that Jake will remember who was there for his wedding for the rest of his life, and so will the rest of the family. After Dad hung up, Mark and I sat in silence among the scattered crib hardware. The nursery, which had felt like a sanctuary of hope and preparation, suddenly felt vulnerable, as if my family's demands could invade even this sacred space. Leah, I need you to understand something, Mark said quietly. What your father just described isn't a family obligation, it's coercion. They're threatening to damage your family relationships if you don't comply with their demands. I knew. He was right, but hearing it stated so plainly was devastating. My family wasn't asking for my presence at Jake's wedding. They were demanding it, regardless of the cost to my health or my child's well-being. That night, I wrote a letter. Not an email or a text message, but an actual handwritten letter on our good stationery. I wanted my words to be deliberate, permanent, and impossible to misinterpret. Dear Mom and Dad, I began, I have given careful consideration to our recent conversations about Jake's wedding, and I need to communicate my position clearly. I explained that I would not be scheduling medical interventions around social events. I outlined the risks of unnecessary C-sections and the medical recommendations for postpartum recovery. I expressed my love for Jake and my happiness about his marriage, while making it clear that my attendance would depend entirely on factors beyond my control. I understand that this may disappoint you, I wrote in closing, but I trust that you will come to understand that my first responsibility is to my child's health and safety. I hope that your first priority is the same. I sealed the letter in an envelope and mailed it the next morning before I could lose my nerve. The postal receipt, 68 cents for a forever stamp, seemed insignificant at the time, but it represented something enormous. The first time in my adult life that I had refused to accommodate my family's unreasonable demands. 3 days later, Mom called. Leah, we received your letter. We're very disappointed in your selfishness, but we understand that pregnancy hormones can affect judgment. When you come to your senses, we'll be here to help you figure out a solution. Mom, this isn't about hormones. This is about reasonable boundaries. Well, we hope you'll reconsider, because Jake's wedding is happening on September 15th, with or without you. And if you choose not to be there, that's a choice you'll have to live with forever. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and finally understanding the true nature of my family's love. It wasn't unconditional. It was entirely conditional on my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for their convenience. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over their expectations. The consequences would prove to be more severe than I'd imagined, but also more liberating than I dared to hope. The retaliation began within hours of my letter reaching my parents. It started subtly, my messages in the family group chat going unread, my calls going straight to voicemail, my texts receiving no responses. But it escalated quickly into something that felt coordinated and deliberate. Jake was the first to make contact, calling me 2 days after I'd sent the letter. His voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Leah, I need you to understand something. This is my wedding day, the most important day of my life, and you're choosing to destroy it because you can't be bothered to plan better? Jake, I'm not trying to destroy anything. I just can't guarantee I'll be available if I'm in labor. That's bullshit, and you know it. Women schedule deliveries all the time. Mom found 3 different doctors who said they'd be happy to accommodate our family's needs. Our family's needs? Jake, this is my child we're talking about. And this is my wedding. The wedding our parents have spent $40,000 on. The wedding they took out a second mortgage to pay for. The wedding that's supposed to be the highlight of our family's year. His voice was rising with each word. But, sure, Leah, make it all about you like you always do. The accusation was so backwards, it left me speechless. I was the one who always made everything about everyone else. I was the one who accommodated, compromised, and sacrificed my own needs for family harmony. Jake, I have never made anything about me. I've spent my entire life putting this family's needs before my own. Really? Then prove it. Schedule the C-section and be at my wedding. The conversation ended with Jake hanging up on me, but it was just the beginning. Over the next week, I received similar calls from Emma, my aunts, my grandparents, and several family friends. Each conversation followed the same script. I was being selfish, I was ruining Jake's special day, and I needed to find a way to make it work. The social media campaign was perhaps the most hurtful part. Mom posted a photo from Jake's engagement party with the caption, "So grateful for family who show up when it matters most." Some people understand that love means sacrifice. The implication was clear, and the comments from extended family members made it even clearer. "Some people just can't handle not being the center of attention," wrote my cousin Beth. "Family should come first, always," added my great-aunt Margaret. Poor Jake and Miranda, having to deal with drama during what should be the happiest time of their lives, contributed a family friend. I wasn't tagged in the post, but screenshots appeared in my Instagram messages from well-meaning friends who couldn't understand what they were seeing. My pregnant sister-in-law's best friend sent me a private message. "Girl, I don't know what's happening with your family, but this is not okay. You're about to have a baby. They should be supporting you, not attacking you." Mark was furious about the social media posts. "They're publicly shaming you for having reasonable boundaries about medical care. This is psychological warfare." The isolation was systematic and thorough. I was removed from family group chats, uninvited from pre-wedding events I hadn't even known were being planned, and excluded from conversations about baby shower gifts and nursery preparations. When I called Mom to ask about a family recipe I'd wanted to make for Mark's birthday, she told me she was too busy with wedding preparations to chat about cooking. Emma's call was perhaps the most devastating. My older sister, whom I'd always looked up to despite our distant relationship, delivered the family's final ultimatum with clinical precision. "Leah, I'm calling because Mom and Dad asked me to. They want you to know that if you choose not to attend Jake's wedding, there will be consequences for your relationship with the family." "What kind of consequences?" "They're not going to visit after the baby is born. They're not going to help with childcare or babysitting. They're not going to contribute to the college fund they've been planning for their first grandchild." Emma paused. "And they're not going to include you in future family gatherings until you apologize for the pain you've caused Jake and Miranda." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were threatening to abandon their grandchild, my child, because I wouldn't schedule surgery around a wedding. "Emma, do you hear yourself? They're talking about punishing a baby because I won't undergo unnecessary medical procedures. They're talking about protecting the family from someone who puts her own convenience above family loyalty." "My own convenience?" "Emma, I'm talking about giving birth. And they're talking about a once-in-a-lifetime wedding that you're choosing to miss out of spite." The conversation went on for another 20 minutes. but it was clear that Emma had been enlisted as the family spokesperson. Every argument I made was met with prepared responses about family obligations, sacrifice, and the importance of supporting Jake during his special time. When I hung up, I realized that my phone screen was showing 17 missed calls from blocked numbers. Family members who had been recruited to pressure me into compliance. My voicemail was full of messages ranging from pleading to threatening, all variations on the same theme: change your mind or lose your family. That evening, Mark found me sitting in the nursery we'd been working on, surrounded by baby clothes and unopened gifts from friends and colleagues. I was holding a tiny onesie that read Grandma's Little Angel that Mom had bought during one of our early shopping trips. "They're really doing this, aren't they?" I said. "They're really choosing. Jake's wedding over our baby." Mark sat beside me on the floor, pulling me into his arms. "It looks that way. I'm so sorry, Leah. I know how much you wanted them to be part of our child's life." The college fund, Mark. They've been talking about starting a college fund for months, posting about being grandparents, buying baby gifts. And now they're threatening to withdraw all of that because I won't schedule surgery around their party. Then we'll start our own college fund. We'll surround our child with people who love unconditionally, not people who use love as a bargaining chip. I looked around the nursery at the crib we'd assembled together, the books we'd chosen, the photos of ultrasounds that documented our excitement about becoming parents. This room represented our love for our child, our hopes for the future, and our commitment to being better parents than the ones who had raised me. "You know what's funny?" I said. "They keep talking about family loyalty and sacrifice, but they've never once asked what I need or how they can support me during this pregnancy. It's all about what I should do for them." My phone buzzed with another blocked call. I turned to Valve completely, tired of being harassed for having reasonable boundaries about my medical care. "Mark, I need you to know that I'm not changing my mind, even if it means losing them completely." "I know," he said, kissing the top of my head, "and I'm proud of you for choosing our family over their manipulation." That night, I blocked every family member's number except for Sarah's. I changed my social media settings to private and removed anyone who had participated in the public shaming campaign. I wasn't cutting off contact forever, but I was protecting myself and my unborn child from psychological abuse disguised as family concern. The blocked phone screen became a symbol for me, digital evidence of the moment I chose my child's well-being over my family's demands. It was the first boundary I'd ever set that they couldn't cross, and their reaction revealed everything I needed to know about the true nature of their love. For 29 years, I had believed that family meant unconditional love and mutual support. In 1 week of escalating pressure and threats, I learned that my family's love came with conditions: comply with their demands, or lose access to their affection. The choice, when I finally saw it clearly, was simple. I would rather raise my child without grandparents than raise my child to believe that love required self-sacrifice and medical risk for other people's social events. The contractions started at 3:17 a.m. on September 13th, 2 days before Jake's wedding. I was awakened by a tightening sensation across my belly that felt different from the Braxton Hicks contractions I'd been experiencing for weeks. These were purposeful, rhythmic, and impossible to ignore. Mark woke when I sat up in bed, my hand instinctively moving to my belly as another contraction built and crested. "Is it time?" he asked, immediately alert despite the early hour. "I think so," I said, breathing through the intensity. "These feel different, real." We'd practiced this moment dozens of times, timing contractions, gathering hospital bags, calling the doctor. But actually experiencing it felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold in slow motion. Mark started timing the contractions while I called my OB/GYN's emergency line. Dr. Martinez called back within 10 minutes. Her voice, calm and professional despite the early hour. "Based on what you're describing, "This sounds like early labor," she said after I detailed the timing and intensity of the contractions. "Since this is your first baby, you likely have several hours ahead of you. Monitor the contractions, rest when you can, and come to the hospital when they're consistently 5 minutes apart for at least an hour." As dawn broke over our quiet neighborhood, I found myself thinking about the irony of the timing. September 13th, 2 days before the wedding that had dominated my family's conversations for months. Close enough to my due date to validate every medical concern I'd raised, but early enough that my family could later claim I should have been able to attend the wedding if I really wanted to. The morning passed in a strange rhythm of contractions, rest periods, and final preparations. Mark called his office to confirm his paternity leave, while I took what would be my last shower as a non-parent. We double-checked our hospital bags, reviewed our birth plan, and called our chosen family, Mark's parents, my cousin Sarah, and our closest friends to let them know that today was likely the day. By afternoon, the contractions were 5 minutes apart and growing stronger. Mark loaded our bags into the car while I said goodbye to our house as a family of two. The hospital bracelet they gave me during admission, Davidson, Leah, patient number 47,291, labor and delivery, would become a treasured memento, proof that I had trusted my instincts and prioritized my child's health over family pressure. Labor was everything the childbirth classes had prepared us for, and nothing like them at the same time. It was longer, more intense, and more primal than I'd expected. But it was also more empowering. Each contraction brought us closer to meeting our baby, and every breath reminded me that I was exactly where I needed to be at 8:42 p.m. after 17 hours of labor. Our daughter Emma Rose Davidson made her entrance into the world. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, with Mark's dark hair and what the nurses assured us were my stubborn expressions. She was perfect, healthy, and absolutely worth every moment of family drama that had led to this point. "She's beautiful," Mark whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held our daughter for the first time. "Leah, she's absolutely perfect." I reached for my phone to take a photo of Mark and Emma, my hands shaking with exhaustion and overwhelming love. As I captured that first family portrait, I noticed the timestamp, 8:45 p.m., September 13th. In less than 18 hours, Jake's wedding would begin, and I would be in a hospital room recovering from childbirth and learning how to breastfeed my newborn daughter. Mark must have read my mind. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. I looked at Emma's tiny face, at her perfect fingers wrapped around Mark's thumb, at the monitors tracking her healthy heartbeat. "Not one," I said. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The nurses were incredibly supportive, especially when they learned about the family conflict that had surrounded my pregnancy. "Honey," said Janet, the night nurse who helped me through my first attempt at breastfeeding, "I've been doing this for 25 years. And I can tell you that babies don't wait for anyone's convenience. You made the right choice." That night, as Mark slept in the hospital chair beside my bed and Emma dozed in my arms, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. The family drama, the wedding pressure, the threats and ultimatums, none of it mattered anymore. I was a mother now, and my only job was to love and protect the tiny person depending on me for everything. My phone buzzed with messages from friends and Mark's family, all celebrating Emma's arrival with joy and excitement. Sarah had posted a photo I'd sent her with the caption, "Welcome to the world, beautiful Emma. Your mama is a warrior and your daddy is over the moon. This little girl is so loved." No messages from my parents, Jake or Emma. Radio silence from the family that had spent months demanding I prioritized their celebration over my child's birth as September 14th dawned and nurses came to check on us. I realized that Emma had been born during the rehearsal dinner for Jake's wedding, while my family was toasting the bride and groom at some expensive restaurant. I was learning how to change diapers and marveling at the miracle of my daughter's existence. The timing felt poetic in a way I couldn't have planned. Emma's birth hadn't interfered with Jake's wedding. It had simply revealed that some moments are more important than others. And some people understand that distinction while others don single quotes T. Tomorrow would be September 15th. The date that had caused so much conflict and heartache. But as I held my daughter and watched her sleep peacefully in the hospital's quiet nursery lighting, I knew I would remember it not as the day I missed my brother's wedding, but as the day after I became a mother. The hospital bracelet on my wrist was more than medical identification. It was proof that I had chosen love over fear, boundaries over compliance, and my child's well-being over everyone else's expectations. It was the best decision I'd ever made. The silence was deafening. For 48 hours after Emma's birth, my phone remained completely quiet from my family's side. No congratulations, no questions about the baby's health, no requests for photos, nothing. Mark's family, in contrast, had been a constant stream of love and support. His parents drove 3 hours to meet their granddaughter, bringing flowers, homemade meals, and tears of joy. His sister called hourly for updates and had already ordered enough baby clothes to outfit triplets. Our friends from work, neighbors, and even distant acquaintances had reached out with congratulations and offers of help, but from the people who had spent months claiming to be excited about their first grandchild. Complete radio silence. On September 15th, Jake's wedding day, sat in my hospital bed feeding Emma while scrolling through social media. My family's posts painted a picture of a perfect celebration, photos of the venue's elaborate decorations, the bridal party getting ready, and guests arriving for the ceremony. Mom looked radiant in her mother of the groom dress. Dad beamed in his tuxedo, and Emma, my sister, was stunning as a bridesmaid. The ceremony photos started appearing around 5 o'clock. Jake looked handsome and happy. Miranda was beautiful, in an elaborate gown that probably cost more than my car. And the venue was everything the coordinator had promised: gardens in full bloom, elegant lighting, and tables set for what appeared to be a lavish reception. What struck me most wasn't the beauty of the celebration, but the complete absence of any acknowledgement that the state had been contentious. No mention in speeches or social media posts that Jake's sister had given birth 2 days earlier. No empty chair with a flower to represent my presence. No toast to the new baby who had been born during the wedding weekend. It was as if I didn't exist. "Look at this," I said to Mark, showing him a photo Mom had posted of the family during the ceremony. Dad, Mom, Emma, Jake, and Miranda stood together in a perfect group portrait, smiling broadly at the camera. The caption read, "Our complete family celebrating Jake and Miranda's perfect day." Complete family? Mark's voice was sharp with anger. "You gave birth to their grandchild 2 days ago, and they're calling themselves complete without you?" I stared at the photo, trying to process the casual cruelty of that caption. After everything we'd been through, the pressure, the ultimatums, the threats they were publicly declaring, that their family was complete without me, that empty mailbox outside our hospital room became a symbol for me. Every day, flowers and cards arrived for other new mothers. Every day, I watched family members celebrate new babies with balloons, gifts, and excited visits. Every day, my mailbox remained empty except for medical information and insurance paperwork. The nurses began to notice. "Honey, where's your family?" asked Janet during one of her evening rounds. "I haven't seen any grandparents or siblings come by to meet this beautiful baby. They had other priorities this weekend," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Janet's expression told me she understood more than I'd said. "Well, that's their loss. This little girl is absolutely precious, and you're doing an amazing job." Mark spent most of Saturday fielding calls from his family and friends while I focused on learning to be a mother. Breastfeeding, diaper changes, and the strange rhythm of newborn sleep occupied most of my attention. But during quiet moments, I found myself checking my phone obsessively, hoping for some acknowledgement from my family that their grandchild had been born. Saturday evening brought a flood of wedding reception photos. The party looked elaborate and expensive: a band, professional lighting, a cake that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Jake and Miranda's first dance was captured from multiple angles, along with toasts from the wedding party and family members. Dad's speech, posted as a video by several guests, made my heart sink. Today, we're not just celebrating Jake and Miranda's love, we're celebrating the power of family to come together and support each other through anything. When people truly love each other, they find ways to be present for life's most important moments. The implication was clear. I hadn't found a way to be present, which meant I didn't truly love my family. Mark found me crying in the hospital bathroom at midnight, scrolling through endless wedding photos while Emma slept peacefully in her bassinet. Leah, you need to stop torturing yourself with those pictures. I just keep thinking that maybe I should have tried harder to find a compromise. Maybe I should have scheduled the C-section like they wanted. Mark took my phone gently from my hands. Listen to me. You gave birth to our daughter 2 days ago after 17 hours of labor. You're recovering from one of the most physically demanding experiences a human body can endure. And instead of receiving love and support from your family, you're being punished for not undergoing surgery to attend a party. It wasn't just a party to them. And Emma's birth wasn't just an inconvenience to us, but they're treating it like it was. Mark sat beside me on the small bathroom chair. Leah, healthy families celebrate new babies. They don't ignore them because of scheduling conflicts. Sunday brought more of the same wedding aftermath photos, thank you posts from Jake and Miranda, and continued silence from my family. The only acknowledgement of Emma's existence came from cousin Sarah, who had been liking and commenting on the photos I'd shared, but was clearly being careful not to mention the wedding conflict. When we were discharged Monday morning, I realized that my family's first grandchild had been born, spent 3 days in the hospital, and come home without a single card, gift, or phone call from them. The contrast with Mark's family, who had already stocked our refrigerator, set up a meal train, and scheduled visits to help with household tasks, was stark and devastating. As we drove home with Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat, I made a decision that would shape the rest of our lives. I wasn't going to chase their approval anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for choosing my child's well-being over their convenience. And I wasn't going to raise Emma believing that love comes with conditions. The empty mailbox at the hospital had taught me something valuable. Some people will celebrate your joy, and others will punish you for not sacrificing it for their comfort. My job as a mother was to surround my daughter with the first kind of people and protect her from the second. Our family of 3 was complete, with or without their approval. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, cousin Sarah called with news that would change everything. Leah, I need to tell you what's happening in the family, she said, her voice tight with anger. I can't stay quiet about this anymore. Emma was sleeping in my arms as I settled into our living room chair, finally feeling physically recovered from childbirth. The past 3 weeks had been a blur of feeding schedules, doctor appointments, and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. Mark had returned to work the previous week, and I was beginning to find my rhythm as a stay-at-home mother. What's going on, Sarah? I went to lunch with your mom yesterday. She's been telling everyone that you chose not to attend Jake's wedding, out of spite that you could have easily scheduled a C-section but refused to accommodate the family. My stomach dropped. She's saying I chose not to attend? Worse than that. She's telling people that you went into labor on purpose, that you somehow induced it to ruin Jake's wedding day. Sarah's voice was shaking with fury. Leah, she's making... You sound like a monster. I felt sick. People believe that. Some do. The ones who don't know better, who weren't around during the planning process. Sarah paused. But Leah, not everyone is buying it. Aunt Linda has been asking questions, and so have some of the other relatives who know how pregnancy actually works. What kind of questions? Like why your parents scheduled Jake's wedding for your exact due date. Why they never tried to change the date when they realized the conflict. Why they're more upset about missing a party than they are excited about their first grandchild. Sarah went on to explain that cracks were beginning to show in my parents' narrative. Extended family members who had initially supported them were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about the timeline of events and the reasonableness of their expectations. Your great-aunt Margaret called me yesterday, Sarah continued. She said something didn't add up about the whole situation. She remembered your parents talking about your due date months ago, but somehow they acted surprised when you couldn't attend the wedding. What did you tell her? The truth, that your parents knew exactly when you were due, that they chose that date anyway because of financial considerations, and that they pressured you to have unnecessary surgery to accommodate their party planning. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. While I was grateful that someone was finally telling the truth about what had happened, I worried about the family drama this would create. Sarah, I don't want to cause more problems. Leah, stop. You didn't cause these problems. Your parents did when they chose to prioritize a party over their grandchild's birth. Sarah's voice was firm, and honestly, it's time people knew what really happened. 2 days later, Sarah's Facebook post changed everything. I was feeding Emma when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Sarah had posted a long, detailed account of the wedding conflict, complete with screenshots of conversations and a timeline of events that made my parents' behavior impossible to defend. I can't stay silent anymore about what happened to my cousin Leah, the post began. For weeks, I've watched family members judge her for choosing not to attend her brother's wedding. It's time for the truth. Sarah's post laid out everything. The deliberate choice of my due date for financial reasons, the pressure to schedule unnecessary surgery, the threats and ultimatums, and the complete silence from my family after Emma's birth. She included photos I'd sent her of Emma in the hospital, along with timestamps that proved I'd been in labor during Jake's rehearsal dinner. This beautiful baby girl was born 2 days before the wedding that was supposedly more important than her arrival. Sarah wrote, her grandparents haven't called, visited, or even acknowledged her existence because her mother chose medical safety over party attendance. This is not about family loyalty. This is about manipulation and emotional abuse. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from family members, family friends, and people I hadn't spoken to in years. Most were supportive, expressing shock at my parents' behavior and congratulations on Emma's birth. But some were defensive, accusing Sarah of airing family business publicly and stirring up unnecessary drama. My phone rang within an hour of the post going live. Mom's voice was cold with fury. How dare you send Sarah to attack us publicly? How dare you make our family business into social media entertainment? Mom, I didn't ask Sarah to post anything. She made that decision on her own. Don't lie to me, Leah. You've been poisoning people against us since the wedding, telling lies about our conversations and making us look like monsters. I haven't talked to anyone about this except Mark and Sarah, and I haven't told any lies everything. Sarah posted is exactly what happened. What happened is that you chose to be selfish and difficult during the most important event in your brother's life. What happened is that you're now trying to destroy our family's reputation because you're angry about the consequences of your choices. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Mom accusing me of everything from emotional manipulation to psychological warfare. When she finally hung up, I realized that even confronted with public accountability, my parents were doubling down on their position, but the damage to their reputation was significant. Over the next few days, I received messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years, offering support and expressing horror at my treatment. Jake's new in-laws reached out privately to congratulate me on Emma's birth and apologize for any role they might have played in the conflict. Even some of Jake and Miranda's wedding guests contacted me to say they hadn't known about the circumstances surrounding my absence. The most meaningful message came from my grandmother, Mom's mother, who had been notably absent from the wedding drama despite usually being the family's voice of reason. "Leah, honey," she wrote in a text message, "I want you to know that I am ashamed of how your parents handled this situation. A grandchild's birth should be celebrated, not ignored. I would very much like to meet Emma when you're ready for visitors." Grandma's message opened the floodgates. Within days, I heard from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had been uncomfortable with my parents' version of events, but hadn't known how to address it. Many had assumed there was more to the story than they'd been told, and Sarah's post had given them permission to voice their concerns. The family's reaction split along predictable lines. The relatives who had always been closest to my parents continued to support them, but many others began distancing themselves from what they now saw as cruel and unreasonable behavior. Jake and Miranda maintained their silence, apparently following my parents' lead and treating me as if I didn't exist. "How do you feel about all this?" Mark asked one evening as we watched Emma sleep in her bassinet. "Relieved," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of that answer. For the first time since this whole thing started, people know what really happened. I'm not the selfish, difficult daughter who ruined her brother's wedding. I'm the mother who chose her child's safety over a party. The truth had finally come to light, carried by my cousin's courage and amplified by social media's reach. It wouldn't repair my relationship with my parents or bring Jake and Miranda around, but it had restored something I hadn't realized I'd lost. My sense that I wasn't crazy, that my position had been reasonable, and that other people could see the cruelty of what I'd endured. Emma stirred in her sleep, making the tiny sounds that already felt precious and familiar. She would grow up knowing that her birth had been celebrated by people who truly loved her, even if it hadn't been celebrated by the grandparents who were supposed to love her most. The voicemail arrived 6 weeks after Emma's birth, just as I was beginning to find my new normal as a mother. I was folding tiny onesies when my phone buzzed with a message from Mom, the first contact I'd had from my parents since their angry response to Sarah's Facebook post. "Leah, honey, it's Mom." Her voice sounded strained, lacking its usual confidence. "I think it's time we talked about this situation. I know there have been some misunderstandings, and maybe we could find a way to move forward. Please call me back when you get this." I played the message 3 times, analyzing every word. Misunderstandings. Not mistakes or poor decisions or we were wrong. Misunderstandings, as if the conflict had been caused by poor communication rather than deliberate choices. Mark found me staring at my phone when he came home from work. "What's wrong?" I played him the voicemail. His expression darkened as he listened. "She wants to reconcile now that the family's turning against them," he said. "This isn't about missing you or Emma. This is about damage control." Part of me wanted to ignore the message entirely. The past 6 weeks had been peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in months. Without the constant family drama, I'd been able to focus entirely on learning to be a mother, recovering from childbirth, and enjoying our new life as a family of 3. But another part of me, the part that had spent 29 years trying to make my family happy, wondered if this could be a genuine attempt at reconciliation. Maybe the family pressure had made them reconsider their position. Maybe they were ready to acknowledge Emma and rebuild our relationship. I called Mom back the next morning while Emma napped, steeling myself for whatever conversation was about to unfold. "Leah," Mom's voice was bright with forced cheer. "Thank you for calling back. How are you feeling? How's the baby? We're both doing well, I said carefully. Emma is healthy and growing, and I'm recovered from the birth. That's wonderful. Honey, I'm so glad to hear it. There was a pause. Listen, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened around Jake's wedding, and I wonder if we might have gotten our wires crossed somewhere along the way. Our wires crossed? Well, you know how stressful wedding planning can be. Everyone was under so much pressure, and maybe we didn't communicate as clearly as we should have. Maybe there were misunderstandings about expectations and possibilities. I felt my jaw clench. She was rewriting history in real time, turning their deliberate pressure campaign into a series of innocent miscommunications. Mom, there weren't any misunderstandings. You and Dad asked me to schedule a C-section so I could attend Jake's wedding 5 days later. That's not a miscommunication. That's an unreasonable demand. No, honey, I think you might be remembering things more dramatically than they actually happened. We were just exploring options, trying to find ways to make everything work for everyone. You threatened to cut me off from the family if I didn't comply. I think you might be exaggerating what was actually said. You know how pregnancy hormones can affect memory and perception. There it was, the gaslighting technique that had defined my childhood. Anytime I remembered events differently than my parents preferred, it was because I was being dramatic, emotional, or hormonally compromised. Mom, I have text messages and voicemails. I know exactly what was said. Another pause. Well, regardless of what anyone said in the heat of the moment, I think we can all agree that family is more important than temporary disagreements. Don't you think it's time we moved past this and focused on the future? What exactly are you? Proposing? I'd like to meet Emma, Mom said, her voice softening into the tone she used when she wanted something. She's our first grandchild, and we've missed so much already. Maybe we could come for a visit this weekend? I felt a flicker of hope despite myself. And what about the rest of it? The things that were said, the threats, the silence after Emma was born. Oh, honey, I think everyone said things they didn't mean during that stressful time. The important thing is that we're family, and family forgives and moves forward. So you're not apologizing? I'm saying that we all probably handled things imperfectly, and now it's time to focus on what really matters, building a relationship with our granddaughter. The conditional nature of her offer became clear as the conversation continued. They wanted access to Emma without acknowledging their behavior, accountability without consequences, and reconciliation without apology. They were willing to pretend the conflict had never happened, if I was willing to pretend their treatment of me had been acceptable. What about Jake and Miranda? I asked, are they part of this reconciliation? Well, they're still hurt about the wedding situation. They felt like their special day was overshadowed by drama, and they need some time to process their feelings. Their special day was overshadowed by the birth of their niece. You know what I mean, Leah. The whole conflict around attendance became a distraction from what should have been a celebration. I realized with crystal clarity that nothing had actually changed. My parents still believed that Jake's wedding had been more important than Emma's birth, that I had been wrong to prioritize my child's safety over their party planning, and that any conflict had been caused by my unreasonable expectations rather than their unreasonable demands. Mom, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe that asking me to schedule unnecessary surgery to attend a wedding was appropriate? I believe that family members who love each other find ways to support each other during important moments. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you, Leah. We wanted you to be part of Jake's wedding because we love you and because families should be together for major celebrations. And do you understand why I couldn't risk my health and my baby's health for a social event? I understand that you made the choice you felt you needed to make, just like we made the choices we felt we needed to make. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the pattern was clear. Mom wanted reconciliation without responsibility, access to Emma without accountability, and a return to family harmony without acknowledging the fundamental cruelty of their behavior. When I finally hung up, I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. For a brief moment, I'd hoped that my parents had genuinely reconsidered their position and were ready to repair our relationship. Instead, I'd learned that they were simply trying to manage the family fallout from their actions while maintaining that those actions had been justified. Mark found me sitting in Emma's nursery afterward, holding our sleeping daughter and staring out the window. "How did it go?" he asked gently. "They want to pretend none of it happened. They want access to Emma without acknowledging that they ignored her birth, threatened to abandon her, and treated me like I was disposable." "What did you tell them?" "That I need time to think about it." I looked down at Emma's peaceful face. "But honestly, Mark, I don't think I can let them around her until they acknowledge what they did was wrong. I can't risk them treating her the way they've treated me." The voicemail from Mom would remain the only attempt at reconciliation my parents would make. When I didn't immediately agree to their terms of forgiveness without accountability, access without apology, they returned to their pattern of silence and public martyrdom. I kept the voicemail saved on my phone for months afterward, not as a reminder of what could have been, but as evidence of what my parents considered an adequate attempt at making amends. It was weak, self-serving, and entirely focused on what they wanted rather than what they had done. It was, in other words, exactly what I should have expected. Emma's first photo album became my masterpiece of intentional family building. Unlike the family photos of my childhood, where I was often relegated to the background or missing entirely, every picture in Emma's album told the story of a child who was celebrated, cherished, and surrounded by people who chose to love her unconditionally. The album's first pages documented her birth and those precious early days in the hospital. Mark's parents holding her for the first time, their faces luminous with joy. Sarah's visit 2 days after we came home, bringing flowers and tears of happiness. Our friends from work stopping by with meals and offers to help with laundry. Each photo captured genuine love and excitement about Emma's arrival. What the album didn't contain was equally intentional. No forced smiles, no obligation visits, no people who treated Emma's existence as conditional on her parents' compliance with family expectations. Every person pictured had earned their place by showing up with authentic love and support. Mark found me working on the album one evening when Emma was 3 months old, carefully arranging photos and writing captions that would help her understand her story someday. "What are you going to tell her about your family?" he asked, settling beside me on the couch. It was a question I'd been grappling with since Emma's birth. How do you explain to a child that their grandparents chose not to be part of their life? How do you protect them from feeling rejected while still being honest about family dynamics? "I'm going to tell her the truth," I said, in age-appropriate ways, that some people love with conditions and others love without limits. That she deserves to be surrounded by the second kind of people. And if your parents want a relationship with her later, then they'll need to demonstrate that they understand why their behavior was harmful and commit to doing better. I turned to a page showing Emma's first smile, captured by Mark's sister during a weekend visit. Emma will never have to earn love by sacrificing her well-being. She'll never have to choose between her own needs and someone else's convenience. The boundaries I was setting extended beyond my parents to the entire family system that had enabled their behavior. Jake and Miranda remained completely silent about Emma's existence, apparently still nursing their grievances about wedding drama that had been caused by their own poor planning. Emma, my sister, made occasional attempts at contact, but always with the underlying message that I should be the one to apologize and make amends. I blocked them all on social media, not out of anger, but out of protection. I didn't want to accidentally see posts about family gatherings Emma wasn't invited to, or holiday celebrations that excluded their first grandchild, or updates about Jake and Miranda's life that made no mention of their niece. The hardest boundary to set was with extended family members who wanted to maintain relationships with both sides of the conflict. Well-meaning aunts and cousins would call occasionally, trying to broker peace or suggesting that I should be the bigger person and reach out first. But their family, my great-aunt Margaret said during one such call, "Surely you can find a way to work things out for Emma's sake." "I am working things out for Emma's sake," I replied. "I'm making sure she grows up knowing that love doesn't come with impossible conditions and that her needs matter as much as anyone else's." "But don't you think she'd benefit from having grandparents in her life?" "She has grandparents in her life, Mark's parents, who have been incredible. What she doesn't need are people who will love her conditionally, who will threaten to withdraw that love if she doesn't meet their expectations." The conversation with Aunt Margaret helped me articulate something I'd been feeling but hadn't put into words. Emma wasn't missing out on anything by not having a relationship with my parents. She was being protected from a pattern of conditional love and emotional manipulation that had shaped my entire childhood. Mark's parents had stepped into the grandparent role with enthusiasm and genuine affection. They visited regularly, sent care packages, and celebrated every milestone with pure joy. When Emma rolled over for the first time, they drove 2 hours just to see her do it again. When she started sleeping through the night, they called to celebrate as if she'd won an Olympic medal. "This is what healthy family relationships look like," I told Mark after his parents' latest visit. "They love Emma for who she is, not for what she can do for them." Building our chosen family became an active, intentional process. We deepened friendships with people who supported our values and boundaries. We connected with other young families in our neighborhood, creating a network of mutual support and shared experiences. We invested in relationships with extended family members who respected our decisions and treated Emma with unconditional love. Sarah became Emma's honorary aunt, the person who would remember every birthday, attend every school play, and serve as a bridge to the positive parts of my family history. Mark's sister took on a similar role, already planning adventures and traditions she wanted to share with her niece. 6 months after Emma's birth, I received an unexpected phone call from Miranda's sister, Rachel, whom I'd met only briefly during wedding planning. "Leah, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from the wedding contact list, and I wanted to reach out about Emma." I braced myself for another attempt at family mediation or guilt-inducing pressure. "I wanted you to know that I think what happened around the wedding was completely wrong," Rachel continued. "I didn't know the full story at the time, but I've learned more recently, and I'm horrified by how you were treated." "Thank you for saying that. I also wanted you to know that not everyone in Miranda's family agrees with how this has been handled. We would love to meet Emma if you're ever open to that, but we completely understand and respect if you're not." Rachel's call opened my eyes to something I hadn't considered. There were people adjacent to the conflict who had been kept in the dark about the true circumstances and who, when they learned the facts, were appalled by my family's behavior over the following months. I heard from several of Jake and Miranda's friends who had attended the wedding without knowing why I wasn't there. When they learned I'd given birth 2 days earlier, their responses ranged from shock to outrage. One of Jake's college friends called to apologize for not reaching out sooner and to congratulate me on Emma's birth. "Man, if I'd known you just had a baby, I would have said something at the wedding," he told me. "That's insane that they didn't even mention it." These conversations helped me understand that my family's version of events that I had selfishly chosen not to attend hadn't been universally accepted, even by people who didn't know me well. The photo album I was creating for Emma would eventually contain hundreds of pictures from her first year, holidays celebrated with Mark's family, Playdates with our chosen family, quiet moments with parents who adored her unconditionally. Each photo represented a conscious choice to surround her with love that didn't come with strings attached. When people asked if I missed my family, the honest answer was complicated. I missed the idea of what they could have been: grandparents who celebrated Emma's milestones, siblings who sent birthday cards, parents who supported my choices even when they disagreed with them. But I didn't miss the reality of what they were: people who used love as a weapon and treated family relationships as bargaining chips. Emma's first Christmas was particularly meaningful because it established our own traditions rather than trying to navigate family politics. We spent Christmas morning at home, just the three of us, opening gifts and taking dozens of photos of Emma's fascination with wrapping paper. Mark's parents came for Christmas dinner, bringing their warmth and genuine excitement about Emma's first holiday. "This feels like what Christmas should be," Mark said as we watched Emma sleep in her Christmas dress, surrounded by new toys and the people who loved her most. No drama, no walking on eggshells, no wondering if someone's going to be offended by something we say or do. I agreed. Just family, however we define it. The boundaries I'd set weren't walls, they were filters, designed to let him love that. Was healthy and keep out love that came with impossible conditions. Emma would grow up knowing the difference, and she would never have to choose between her own well-being and someone else's approval. That was the greatest gift I could give her: the knowledge that she deserved love without limits, and the strength to walk away from anyone who tried to convince her otherwise. Emma's first birthday party invitation list was a masterpiece of intentional community building. 23 people who had shown up consistently throughout her first year, who celebrated her milestones genuinely, and who treated her existence as a joy rather than an inconvenience. Mark's parents had offered to host the party at their house, which had a large backyard perfect for a September celebration. Sarah was coordinating decorations with the enthusiasm of a professional party planner. Our neighbors, work friends, and chosen family members had all responded with excitement about celebrating our little girl's first year of life. What the invitation list didn't include was equally significant: no one who had ignored Emma's birth, no one who had treated her parents' boundaries as negotiable, and no one who would bring drama or conditional love to her special day. "Are you sure you don't want to invite your parents?" asked my friend Jessica as we planned the party menu. "I mean, it's Emma's first birthday. Don't you think they might want to be there?" If they wanted to be part of Emma's life, they've had 12 months to reach out, I said, arranging photos for a display board that would show Emma's growth throughout her first year. The fact that they haven't tells me everything I need to know about their priorities. The photos on the display board told Emma's story beautifully. Her first smile at 6 weeks, captured by Mark during a lazy Sunday morning. Her first laugh at 3 months, prompted by silly faces from her grandpa Jim, Mark's father. Her first taste of solid food at 6 months, documented by Grandma Susan, who had driven over specifically to witness the milestone. Her first steps at 11 months, cheered on by Sarah during a weekend visit. Every major moment had been witnessed, celebrated, and preserved by people who genuinely cared about Emma's development and happiness. The absence of my parents from these photos wasn't a void. It was evidence that Emma's life was full of people who chose to show up for her. 2 days before the party, I received a text message from Mom. Heard through the family that Emma's first birthday is this weekend. Would have been nice to be invited to our granddaughter's party. I stared at the message for several minutes, marveling at the entitlement it contained. After a year of silence, after ignoring Emma's birth and refusing to acknowledge her existence, Mom apparently expected an invitation to her birthday party. I showed the message to Mark, who shook his head in disbelief. She's been radio silent for 12 months, and now she's offended that she wasn't invited to celebrate the child she's been ignoring. It's actually perfect timing, I said. Emma's birthday is September 15th, exactly 1 year after Jake's wedding. They chose Jake's party over Emma's birth, and now they're upset about missing Emma's party. The irony wasn't lost on me. 1 year ago, my family had insisted that Jake's wedding was more important than anything else happening in our lives. Now they were discovering that Emma's birthday, which fell on their wedding anniversary, was being celebrated by people who actually cared about her, while they remained on the outside looking in. Emma's birthday party was everything a first. Birthdays should be joyful, relaxed, and focused entirely on celebrating her. She toddled around the backyard in her party dress, delighting in the attention and the colorful decorations. Mark's parents had made a photo timeline of her first year, and guests spent time looking through the pictures and sharing their favorite memories of watching her grow. "Look at this happy baby," said our neighbor Carol, holding Emma while she examined a birthday balloon. "She's so secure, so confident. You can tell she knows she's loved." Sarah gave a short toast before we sang happy birthday to Emma, who has brought so much joy into all of our lives this year, and to Leah and Mark, who have shown us what it means to build a family based on love, respect, and genuine care for each other. As Emma smashed her first birthday cake, a tradition that resulted in frosting in her hair and pure delight on her face, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the community we'd built around her. These people had chosen to be part of her story, had invested in her happiness, and had supported our family through a difficult year. The party cleanup revealed something touching. Several guests had written notes for Emma to read when she was older, sharing their hopes and dreams for her future. Mark's father had written about looking forward to teaching her to fish. Sarah had promised to take her on adventures and always listen when she needed to talk. Our friend David had pledged to help her with math homework and remind her that she could be anything she wanted to be. These notes, which I tucked into Emma's baby book, represented something my own childhood had lacked. Adults who were committed to her well-being without expecting anything in return. 3 weeks after the party, I received a longer message from Mom, apparently frustrated that her first text had gone unanswered. "Leah, this has gone on long enough. Emma is our granddaughter, and we have a right to be part of her life. You're being vindictive and using our grandchild as a weapon to punish us for something that happened over a year ago. We're willing to let bygones be bygones and move forward, but you need to stop this childish behavior." I read the message to Mark over dinner while Emma played happily in her high chair, babbling and throwing Cheerios on the floor. "Let bygones be bygones," Mark repeated. "She wants to forget the past without addressing it, and she's calling you childish for having boundaries." "The timing is interesting too," I pointed out. Emma's birthday party was posted all over social media by our friends. Mom probably saw how happy and loved Emma looked and realized what she's missing out on. But the message also revealed that nothing fundamental had changed in my parents' thinking. They still believed they had a right to access Emma regardless of their behavior toward her parents. They still characterized my boundaries as vindictive rather than protective. And they still expected reconciliation without accountability. Didn't respond to Mom's message, but I did save it, along with all the others I'd received over the year. Emma would someday be old enough to ask about her missing grandparents, and I wanted to have documentation of their choices and priorities. That evening, as I put Emma to bed in her nursery now, decorated with photos from her birthday party and artwork from friends who loved her, I reflected on the year that had passed since her birth, 12 months ago. I had been terrified that choosing Emma's well-being over my family's demands would leave her without extended family. Instead, it had given her something better, a chosen family that celebrated her unconditionally, supported her parents' values, and invested in her happiness without expecting anything in return. Emma fell asleep clutching a stuffed animal that Sarah had given her for her birthday. surrounded by cards from people who had marked the date on their calendars and planned ahead to celebrate her. The contrast with my own childhood, where my special moments were often forgotten or overshadowed by Jake's needs, was stark and intentional. "Sweet dreams, baby girl," I whispered as I turned off her light. "You are so loved by so many people, exactly as you are." As I walked back to the living room where Mark was cleaning up the last of the birthday decorations, I realized that Emma's first year had taught me something profound. Family isn't about blood relations or shared last names. It's about people who show up consistently, who celebrate your joys and support you through challenges, and who love you without conditions or limitations. Emma had a family, a big, loving, chosen family that would be there for all her future birthdays, graduations, and milestones. The fact that some people who shared her DNA had chosen not to be part of that family was their loss, not hers. The invitation to her second birthday party, I decided, would be sent to the same 23 people who had made her first birthday so special, because these were the people who had earned their place in her life, who had proven their love through actions rather than demands, and who would continue to show up for her regardless of what anyone else chose to do. Some families are born, others are built, one loving choice at a time. Emma's family was definitely the second kind, and it was absolutely perfect.